Hello, I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast. Today on Edmonton's podcast, my guest is Gary Lamphier, who is principal of Lamphier Communications. Thanks for joining us today, Gary.
Oh, my pleasure, Mario. Good to see you again.
Okay, now I neglected in the intro to mention that you're a veteran journalist, business journalist of more than 30 years with places like the Edmonton Journal, Vancouver Sun, Globe and Mail, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times of Canada, probably more. We'll get into that a little later in the podcast. But let me just ask you, first of all, Gary, tell me what you're up to these days and what you do now.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a communications consultant. So I work on a wide variety of projects, whether it's website content for a private client or University of Alberta, School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. I've done some work for them. And it really just depends. The nature of the work depends on the needs of the client, of course. It's all over the map. Sometimes I'll do a little bit of media relations. If, let's say, a researcher has done some interesting stuff and wants some publicity, I'll try to help with that. So again, just depends on their needs.
Okay, so tell us the story of how you got to where you are now and doing this.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I worked as a business reporter slash columnist for 30 plus years in a variety of publications and cities across the country. Wound up in Edmonton in '02 and worked as a business columnist for the Edmonton Journal till I retired from there in 2016, a little over 7 years ago, which kind of knocks me out to think that it's been that long already. And so I decided about 3 months after I retired to put out a shingle and start advertising my services as a communications consultant. I did that for a period of about 4+ years in Vancouver during a sort of, I don't know, break from the world of journalism. So that was from 98 till '02. So I had some skills that I developed from those days, and I decided to utilize that to try and make some money. As a semi-retired guy, as I say, I
Yeah.
retired from newspapers, so I have a bit of a pension, but I needed to top that up and also keep active. So that's what I'm doing.
So, for a long time journalist, how difficult was it to make that transition? You know, we grew up in this industry. You and I
Sure.
have almost seeing two opposing camps: the journalists and the communications are spin doctors, right?
Mm.
Uh, you consider yourself a spin doctor now?
If I am, I'm a pretty crappy one, I have to say. I mean, I'm basically telling stories from a different
Yeah,
perspective, from the perspective of a guy trying to help a client get their story out. And often the stories I'm telling now as a communications advisor are pretty freaking complicated, you know? I mean, the world of science, trying to explain how a brain scientist's research
yeah,
translates into potentially a medication or a treatment for people with depression or anxiety issues. That's complicated stuff. So that's the skill set. But I'll just going back to what I said earlier in the intro, I did do this for 4 or 5 years in Vancouver. And during those years, I was a more conventional corporate communications advisor. So I was working with publicly traded companies,
yeah.
technology companies, biotech companies, resource companies, helping them tell their story. So at that juncture in my life, I was doing things like quarterly conference call scripts, corporate presentations to investors, advising on media communications if a
Yeah.
company had some kind of issue that it had to address. So that was a little bit more corporate and big picture. The
Yeah.
stuff I'm doing now is with smaller clients, and many of them are private. So
Yeah. It all comes down, whether it's a journalist or whether it's a communications person, it all comes down to the storytelling, right?
absolutely. Yeah, trying to engage people so that they kind of have some understanding of what it is the client is doing and trying to convey to them. And it's, often, and you'll know this, Mario, when you talk to people that are neck deep in what they do, they are immersed in it. They kind of lose touch with the way the world perceives them.
Yeah.
Well, they think the rest of the world gets what they're doing because in their own minds, it's really, really important.
Yeah.
And but it's not so easy for them to communicate what they're doing to the broader world. So that's kind of where we fit in.
Yeah. So what makes, in your mind, what makes a good story?
People, I think that's a big part of it.
Hmm.
People always make stories more interesting. If it's just about numbers, you lose people pretty quick.
Yeah.
You have to communicate the way it's going to change people's lives if there's some like human impact
Yeah.
of what the client is doing, whether it's in the world of psychotherapy, brain science, pharmacy. One of my clients is a very entrepreneurial woman who's really got some pretty cool ideas in terms of how to roll out medications to third world countries, if I can use that term, or developing countries in Africa.
Huh.
And she's trying to serve as a kind of intermediary between the world of pharmaceuticals and the end user in African countries where they don't have the money to typically buy or dispense pharmaceuticals to their populations. So she's got some pretty big picture ideas that are pretty interesting. And one little story that I communicated to the media recently about her is that she's got some interesting backers in the US and Silicon Valley and elsewhere.
Mm.
And they funded a billboard in Times Square for her little company, her little tiny little Edmonton company. So, we got some interest in local media here in Edmonton
Yeah.
about that because it's kind of cool when a little company locally gets on the big screen in Times Square. So, yeah, that's just kind of an example of the kind of offbeat stuff that I do.
You'll have to send me their contact info because it sounds like a good topic for me as a podcast.
Sure. Actually, that's a great idea. Be happy to.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny you talk about the human element, right? And I've done some media or media training for companies as well over the last few years, and always bring this up, and always bring up the example of when taxes go up, property taxes or whatever, say in a neighborhood, the Calgary Herald would go grab little Granny Smith and who lived in inner city neighborhood or seeing her taxes going up, senior,
Yeah,
and what impact it has. But that human element is something that obviously grabs people's attentions more than, as you said, the numbers. I was
so
going to
true.
ask you, how, from now sitting on that side of the fence, so
Mhm.
to speak, approaching the media, what are your thoughts today about approaching the media? We all know what's happened to the media
Mhm.
over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, but more so in the last 5 years. How difficult is it to approach the media with stories these days?
Well, yeah, it's a tough sell. I mean, let's be honest, because newsrooms, as you alluded to, have shrunk so much. I'll give you a concrete example. When I came to Edmonton in '02 to be their business columnist, we had a 10-person business department. So we
Yep.
had reporters with dedicated beats, forestry, manufacturing, mining, oil and gas, transportation, you name it. When I walked out the door in December 2016, 7 years ago, I was the last surviving member of that 10-person department.
Yeah.
And this is a 100-plus-year-old newspaper. So I was the last guy who was a dedicated business journalist at a 100-plus-year-old newspaper walking out the door.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's tough because there are fewer bodies and certainly way fewer dedicated business bodies.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're covering business stories, tougher to engage a general assignment reporter on a complex business story.
Yeah.
So you got to keep it short and sweet. Timeliness is critical, right? So whatever is happening in the 24-hour news cycle that day, if you could tie into that, that's great. That's a big plus. Trust is important. Like you and I have been around the block a few times, so people know us
Yeah.
the people that have survived in these newsrooms know us. If you're coming in as a fresh face, it's tougher. Um, and I think just being able to connect the dots for people, like when you pitch them, you have to do a lot of the legwork that you would expect in the old days a reporter to do.
Yeah. That's
But
true.
when you do the pitch, you're like presenting a story on a platter, basically.
Yeah.
And I've had people tell me, wow, there was so much info in your release, I hardly had to do any research, right? Well, I consider that, thank you very much, a compliment because that's my job now
Yeah.
to try and do the work that a reporter would have to because they have no time, right? So fewer bodies means less time. And often they're doing 2 and 3 stories a day, not one. So,
And
yeah.
what you described there, Gary, for Edmonton is same story from every, say, post media newspaper from Vancouver to Montreal, right? The same issue, right? You know, I know at the Herald, the same thing. Like I think when I left the Herald, and so it would have been January of 2016. Yeah, January
Mhm.
2016.
Mhm.
So coming up to 8 years actually next
Yeah,
week.
well,
Next week is 8 years. Anyways, same thing. Like, we had newsroom. I think we had even more than 10 at one point
mhm.
in business because of the
Yeah.
oil and gas sector, et cetera. And it was just literally like one or two left when I was gone. So
How many are there now? Do you know off the top?
oh, no idea.
Aside, there's Chris Varco. I see his stuff, but are there
Yeah,
any
he's
others?
still around. So there are a couple of the old veterans, but then the thing is, you multiply that across the board, so it's sports and it's arts and entertainment and it's city and
Mhm.
politics. All those departments, not just business, all those departments got that. So it does make it from a communications standpoint much tougher
Yeah.
for people to get their story across. What
Yeah.
when you look, and you spend a good chunk of time here in Alberta, what do you see in the Alberta, I guess, economy these days? What are you sensing is happening with this province?
Well, I get in the broad sense, I get the feeling that we're in some sort of a weird limbo or pause. I don't know what the right word is, interregnum or something.
Yeah,
Um, because let's look at the big picture. National election in the US this year in the fall, that's
yeah,
huge. Our own federal election, next year, possibly even earlier, who knows?
yeah.
Um, and I think that's going to have a huge bearing on the future of our key industry, oil and gas, whichever way those two elections go. Because I'll just pull back from that specific question for a moment to give you a little bit more context. So when I left the Journal in 2016, there were a bunch of reasons, but one of the key reasons was I really reached the point in my career where I felt that I couldn't report on business anymore in the way that I traditionally had. Politics had totally usurped business
Huh.
in the most important industry in this province. And so
Yeah,
all the big decisions were political decisions. They weren't business decisions anymore.
true.
And I felt, gee, I mean, what's my point? What's my purpose in life here in this newsroom, where really the decisions about the companies I cover aren't being made by the companies I cover. They're being made in Ottawa or elsewhere. So I just think since that time, since 2015 when Trudeau was elected, and since Biden was elected, I think it's like the whole energy world is kind of on pause. And yes, we've got record production, and yes, the U.S. has record production, and yes, prices are still pretty good, and companies are very profitable, and the balance sheets are cleaner than in a long time. But nonetheless, there's still kind of a stymied sense of investment or confidence in investment over the long term. And we got issues like this Trans Mountain pipeline never ending, and
Yeah.
budget just going through the roof. I can't believe the numbers now that we see. So you just wonder how much stinky politics underlies those numbers. And
Yeah.
until that gets cleaned up and investors have confidence again in investing big sums of money, tens of billions of dollars in projects, I think we're going to be stuck in this kind of limbo. And there could be a sea change if Biden's gone, if Trudeau's gone, and the leaders that succeed them are kind of two thumbs up for oil and gas again, and the kind of preoccupation with emissions, which I'm a tad skeptical of, and I think you probably guessed.
Mhm.
Um, if that dissipates, then I think it could be a new day. In the
Mm.
meantime, we're doing pretty good. Having said all that, yeah, right? Like the massive population growth, house prices are up significantly in Calgary, not so much in Edmonton, but
Yeah.
Calgary. And our GDP, I think, led the nation last year.
Yeah.
We're probably going to do okay this year within a kind of sea of difficulty in Canada.
Yeah.
In relative terms, we'll do okay. So, and that's a long-winded answer to a short question. Sorry.
No worries. So, when you look at the oil and gas sector, right? Obviously the bread and butter for this province
Yeah,
for decades, it's been under attack. It's been, a lot of calls over the years for diversifying the economy, et cetera. Yet it's still our go-to, right? Industry,
absolutely.
and will
Yeah.
continue to be, right?
Yeah, well, we're what, 80% of Canada's supply, and Canada is fourth biggest oil producer in the world, fifth biggest natural gas, I think.
Hmm.
And on a positive note, we've got the Canada LNG plant coming on in BC, the Coastal GasLink pipeline being completed. And so there's, a little bit of, enthusiasm, bullishness in the natural gas sector, given that. And, who knows? I mean, maybe 10 years from now, we'll see this fleet of LNG plants that Christy Clark promised 10 years ago. Her timing was a little off, but maybe it'll actually happen. If it does, I think that'd be great for Canada and great for Alberta.
Now, when you started, say, your career, not started career, but started at the Journal and writing business, how has the business environment in Alberta changed? And I'm thinking more in terms of the types of businesses. Obviously, like back then, oil and gas was everything, right? And today, we're seeing smaller, pockets of growth in what technology, even alternative energy,
Yeah,
uh, agri-food, and all that. It's been a big change over the years that you've seen?
sure. I mean, I think, I can give you one specific example. One of our homegrown companies in Edmonton is Stantec.
Yes.
So I remember writing stories early on at the Journal saying, oh, we have our first $1 billion company,
Yeah.
Stantec. And then we added another, Canadian Western Bank. And Capital Power was a third. So I just for fun the other day, I checked Stantec's market cap. It's like $12.5 billion today. And it's
Yeah.
a global company, right? They're all over the planet.
Yeah.
So, and that's massive. They've got tens of thousands of employees. So it's grown, it's mushroomed, and there are others not as dramatic in terms of their growth, but steady Eddie growers, and so it has diversified our economy. And I think the future looks right for agriculture. I think it's a sector where there's great global demand for our products, high quality products. There's innovation happening. Um, but I also have to say, if I'm honest, that we sometimes get a little bit dazzled by the prospect of economic transformation through innovation.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I mean by that. So when I started working as a journalist in the late 70s and early 80s, there was all this talk about Canada in Ontario, outside of Ottawa, becoming Silicon Valley North, right? Well, 40 plus years, almost half a century later, right? We've got some success stories, it's true, but I think if you added up all the tech companies in Canada, they wouldn't equal a quarter of one Microsoft, right? So I think we got to get real too about what we can do in terms of diversification, in
Hmm.
terms of scale. Yes, we can diversify, and there are 1,000 opportunities out there to do that in smaller ways, and maybe out of those 1,000 opportunities, we'll develop two or three, mid-size publicly traded companies.
Yeah.
That may happen, but that's kind of the opportunity as I see it.
Yeah.
I think we have to get real about what we can do. We are relatively isolated. We don't have the population of big US states like California. So
No, that's true. So
I'm
Gary,
still an oil and gas booster. That's where I think our future is.
yeah, no, I think a lot of people are with you on that. So, Gary, over the years, you've obviously talked to a lot of quote unquote movers and shakers out there in the business world. Um, Alberta's kind of been known for its entrepreneurial spirit. Do you believe, like, is that like an image that's been concocted out there to sell to everybody, or is it something that you've truly seen over the years that we do really have this entrepreneurial spirit in this
Oh,
province?
I think it's real. I think it's genuine. And I say that as a guy who grew up in Ontario and spent 13 years in BC before coming here. I think it's in the DNA of the province. I think, and I can't count the number of entrepreneurs I've talked to who started from nothing and built real companies. I mean, Stantec's an example, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Massive company, but many, many others that built companies of scale by starting out with a pickup truck. And it's kind of, you know, it's a bit of a, some people may think it's kind of a myth, but it's true. I've seen them. And I
Yeah.
think if we do get the wind in our sails again in the oil and gas industry, if we do see political change, and there is a renewed confidence in investing, that's going to trickle down to all these mom and pop companies and all these service providers, and well beyond the oil and gas industry to all the other industries. I mean, you and I will remember the days when they couldn't hire people in fast food restaurants,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they were offering them like $20 an hour to
Yeah.
serve burgers
Yeah.
because of, you know, a shortage of employees. They're all being sucked away by the oil and gas boom. And so nobody wanted to work in other industries. I don't think we want to see that again, exactly. We want, you know, people to enter a variety of fields and industries and develop the talent base here. But I do think that entrepreneurialism is a real part of the fabric here in Alberta. And I think it will remain so. I'm confident of that.
All right, wonderful. Well, thanks very much, Gary, for taking the time today.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Mario. I think it's a great pleasure to chat with you again.
All right, super. That was Gary Lamphier, who is the principal of Lamphier Communications in Edmonton, and also a former or business columnist and journalist with various newspapers and publications over the years. I'm Mario Toneguzzi, managing editor of Canada's podcast, today on Edmonton's podcast. Thanks for joining us.